hard to even fathom that, right? And someone who's 67 years old, of course, the older I get, the younger everybody becomes, right? And
Yes,
so,
yes.
that was your first sign, because a lot of people say, looking back, maybe I saw some signs, but I didn't really pay that much attention to them, or maybe I saw them and I didn't want to pay attention, and they kind of stuck their head in the sand and tried to just ignore it, maybe a little bit in denial. But it sounds like, with you, that was like it was a major, like, aha moment, right? That was a major red flag for you.
It was a major red flag, and I was aware of it somewhat because of symptomatically with other family and loved ones who I had cared for. And yes, you're right. There are people where they don't recognize it. And I encourage anyone listening to this, don't be the person who puts your head in the sand. The sooner that you recognize that something is different, the sooner that you're able to get everybody into a routine, find out the testing, start on the journey, get your support network around you, the earlier do you do that, the easier your journey will be. And I haven't talked to anyone who was pleased when they had just tried to tamp it down, because it made it harder when they finally, when you couldn't keep it hidden anymore. It was so much harder on everyone, especially on family members who hadn't known, and they'd been symptomatic like this for quite a while.
Yeah, a lot of spouses, when they're together many years, they try to cover it up, thinking they're doing their loved one a favor, and they want to cover it up and not talk about it. But like you said, the sooner it gets out there on the table, the better off for everyone it really would be, for your support system too. So you said an important word, the word journey. And that's a great segue into the next thing that I'd like to talk about, right after a commercial break. So we're going to keep everybody in suspense, but we're going to talk about caregiving journey. So we'll be right back, everyone. Stay tuned. Don't go away. More with Sue Ryan when we return.
Arden Court's memory care community has the expertise and experience to simplify and enhance your loved one's life and to protect you, finding the peace of mind you deserve. Come, see the difference in a facility like Arden Courts that is 100% dedicated to Alzheimer's and dementia care can have on your loved one. Call us at 888-478-2410 or visit our website, arden-courts.com. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Sue Ryan. Sue is a wonderful author, speaker, educator, coach, mentor, and a family caregiver. And she's joining us today via internet on our show from her home office in North Naples, Florida. So, Sue, speaking of being an author, you've written several books, and one of them is called The 5 Steps to Navigate Your Caregiving Journey. You mentioned a caregiver's journey, and you actually wrote a book about it. So, why did you write this book, and how can this book help caregivers on their journey?
Thank you very much, Marcia. I was inspired to write this book. It just came to me and said, it's time for you to share what you've been learning over these past years. And when I created the book, the full title is called Our Journey of Love, 5 Steps to Navigate Your Caregiving Journey. And what the title, first part of the title, originally came from when Jack and I were sitting together in the doctor's office and he was first diagnosed. I looked at him and said, honey, we're beginning a new chapter in our journey of love. when I wrote the book, I wanted to share with people kind of what I call the messy middle, the day in and day out, the things that we're going through in the journey. And so the 5 steps of the caregiving journey, and it's not that they're sequential, it's just gathering information in 5 different areas, talks about developing the relationships, having communication, when things are working and not working. And it gives a lot of tips and tricks and strategies and things that I did. And since I wrote the book, when I was talking with people, they would ask questions that were externally from what the book was. And so I created another program, and I've created an online course. And of course, I'm writing another book that extends that out to be the entire caregiver's journey from before the journey begins or right when the diagnosis happens until moving forward after we've grieved the loss of our loved one. And so everything that I've been doing in the original book and in what I'm doing now is I want to make it faster and easier for people to have solutions in their caregiving journey. So like we were talking on the roller coaster, you stay balanced. And I also have a perspective many people have shared they never had access to, which is I have a very positive perspective, not a rose-colored glasses Pollyanna perspective. I look at opportunities and positive things we can take from the journey while being realistic about the journey. And I cover that in the book.
Well, that is so special because, you know, it's such a detrimental type of diagnosis to receive. People are just, you know, overwhelmed and devastated by it, things that you never expect to happen, changes their whole life. And it just makes you feel sometimes hopeless, right? But to find the positive, to emphasize positive things or opportunities within the journey, you know, to make it better is very, very hopeful for people. And it can be a good journey. And I know it sounds probably very strange to some people when you say a caregiver's journey. Probably some people think that right away, well, that's just very sad and lonely, but it doesn't always have to be. And I think that's what you're trying to say, is that it doesn't have to be that way, and you just have to have a different outlook, a different mindset. And I think that's what your book is all about, is sharing that with people so that there can be hope. There can still be life after Alzheimer's diagnosis. Yeah.
Exactly. And the positive perspective that I have came from something that was a combination of my professional career and my caregiving journey, and I call it massive acceptance and radical presence. And it started with an experience I had with my dad where I really, really underserved the experience. He had already been diagnosed. We were sitting out on the lanai one evening. It was dusk, and all of a sudden he just jumped up and said, "Walk the dog," grabbed the dog leash, and he started to walk out the side door of the lanai. And there were 2 side doors, one that went onto a concrete path and one that went out to the grass, and it was a rolling hill that went down. And I'm concerned because if he went out and tripped and all of those kinds of things, and all my life he was trying to keep me safe. So I'm trying to get him to go this way. He wants to go that way. He's getting agitated. I'm getting agitated. The dog is getting agitated. And while we were all safe ultimately, later as I reflected on it, I realized that I had accepted my dad had dementia, but I hadn't massively accepted it 100%. This is what it is, exactly the way it was, not trying to pretend it could be something else, not thinking just because all these years he taught me to be safe that he could still do that. I hadn't massively accepted it, and because I hadn't, I couldn't be radically present, which is absolutely so focused in the moment that I can see all of it, and it's like things slow down. And had I been radically present, I would have recognized when he said, "Walk the dog," and he went that way. That was all he had access to. I may have said, "Hey, Dad, you want to go this way?" And if he started going that way still, I would have known that's all he had access to. I would have gone. I would have stayed very calm. I would have looked at the surroundings and tried to make sure we were safe. But it would have been a much better experience for us both. And so I've carried massive acceptance and radical presence. And that also allows me to have the positive perspective, because when you can look at what's going on, for example, when they're listening to music and their face lights up and they get great joy from it, you can celebrate that in that moment, they've got so much joy.
So, how did you group 5 things together? There's 5 steps. I mean, I'm sure there could have been a lot more steps, but I guess you've prioritized these 5 steps as the most important ones. Can you sort of just in general tell us about the 5 steps without telling us everything in the book, because we want to get it and read it, but in general?
Sure, that's fine. And I'll share some of the things that are about it. So again, the 5 steps aren't like if you're going to learn math, you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. Like you said, they're more organized by kind of like topics. And for example, part of it in the beginning is figuring out the journey, starting and giving yourself permission to be like totally blindsided in the very beginning. Because for me, for example, healthcare is not the field I was in. I was in technology. I was in sales. I didn't choose healthcare. I'd never been in a role of caregiving. And all of a sudden, when the diagnosis is received, you want a PhD in the diagnosis to care for your loved one, and you want a PhD in being a caregiver. And by the way, this caregiver is this huge umbrella with everything underneath it. It didn't come with any kind of an instruction manual or a user's guide. And so years ago, oh, the caregiver does it. Oh, the caregiver does it. Oh, the caregiver does it. And so one of the steps I talk about is something that I brought in for my professional career, is when I had a very large project, I would break it down into smaller, more manageable pieces. And I did that with the roles of caregiving. For example, I'm Jack's primary caregiver, and I used to be for all of the things that he needed as long as I was qualified for that. When it became apparent that staying at home, I didn't have the capacity to keep him safe, and it would be better if he was in an environment where he had more social stimulation, I then stayed being the caregiver, the primary caregiver, but my responsibilities were diminished because I put some of those over into the community I moved him in, and I then became a care partner. So I identify about being a care partner. And then there's a care supporter. And so there are different kinds of things you do. And I'll give you an example of one of those give you 2 quick examples. When I moved him into the continuing care community, they called me from the care community after a couple weeks and said, Jack all of a sudden just doesn't want to shave. And I said, I can give you a solution for that, because I knew him. Mm-hmm. He Mass everyday Catholic, and he also would go to work every day. And so he shaved before he went to work, shaved to go to church in the morning before he went to work. And so I said, when he gets up, tell him it's time to shave, to go to church and to go to work. He never had an issue. So my responsibility as a care partner, and I talk about this in the book, are to do everything I possibly can so that he's the best possible resident and I'm the best possible support for him. An example of this that was with the pandemic, I was feeding him lunch March 13th, and we were all asked to leave the facility right while I was feeding him lunch. It wasn't like you could wait till you were done. We had to get up and leave at that moment. And from that day forward until we were allowed in, which was nearly 11 months later, every single day I wrote a note that I could submit on the website of the community he was living in. I thanked the nurses, I thanked the administrative staff, I thanked the security staff, I thanked maintenance, the yard people. I sent different notes. I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you very much. Thank you for the care you're providing. Thank you for the risk you're taking. I wanted everyone to know every single day that they mattered and it was important. And so as a care partner for them, because I couldn't see him, when you've got Alzheimer's disease, it's not like you can put the phone up and they're going to connect with it. And so I was relying on them to be the eyes and ears and care that I couldn't be. And I wanted them to know how much I appreciated that. So in the book, I talk about that. And then I talk about conversations. One of the other things is difficult or challenging kinds of conversations you may come. I call it the elephants in the caregiver's room. And I use the analogy of different things with elephants and tie that to the journey, and kind of conversations with family members, or conversations with the care community. There are changes in your physical relationship. They're getting legal things done. So I talk about a variety of different things. And then I also talk about this being your journey. I talk about not using labels for words, not letting other people define the journey for you. Do you have time for me to tell one other story that might be relevant for that?
I would love for you to tell us.
Excellent. One of the things that I've noticed so often over these last nearly 40 years now is that many people step into the role of caregiver and they immediately take what other people have told them. It's terrible, it's overwhelming, it's draining, this horrible disease. And that's what they come into it thinking. And so it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I want people to have their own labels for things because it's the definition they use. I want them to have their own journey. When my husband was early in the time he was in the continuing care community, he was at, a psychiatrist made an appointment to see him, and I had not requested that appointment. And so I said, well, I want to be there. And she said, oh, no, I meet with the patient by themselves. And I said, well, then you and I are going to meet before you meet with him. And we sat down, and she said, and I actually wrote the words down so I wouldn't forget them, and I memorized her facial expressions and what she did. She said, that horrible, dreadful, debilitating disease. That was how she began our conversation. And had I not chosen that I was going to determine our journey, not someone else, it would have been easy for me to have taken that view because she was a person of authority. These are the kinds of different things I talk about in the book because I want you to have the journey that's your journey. I'm not saying it's easy. I want the challenges to be things. When you have a decision you need to make and it's a challenging time, I want you to be as prepared to have that conversation as possible.
Wow. I'm sure that was an eye-opener for you to see a different perspective from a professional. So one of the things that you say is know yourself, know your journey.
Yes.
So elaborate a little bit on that. I think we're on that track right now, but you say know yourself, know your journey. What does that exactly mean, knowing yourself in order to know your journey?
I think one of the most valuable things we can do in our lives, as well as in our caregiving journeys, is understanding ourselves in a meaningful way. And I learned this externally to my caregiving journey and have applied it very helpfully in that. We have all taken different kinds of assessments and learned about our personality types in one way, shape, or form. And I studied a number of them, including the Enneagram, which identifies different personality types, and there are other assessments. But what I learned is we come into the world naturally wired to view it a certain way. And in our very early childhood, we start developing our personality and our beliefs, and they become patterns for us. And a lot of those are really very good and very helpful. And yet what worked for me at the age of 7 may not be working for me now. And unlike insurance companies that remind you every year your policy's about to renew, hey, is everything going okay? We're not reminded that we need to look at ourselves and update our personalities. And there are people who, for example, when times are great, they're the best person in the world, but under stress, they become this completely different person, and they don't know why. They just like, well, that's the way I am. And so part of what I talk about in our caregiving journey is understanding how we're naturally wired to deal with stress. And when we understand that, we can understand how we can learn to deal with stress better and not looking at how somebody else deals with it because they're different than we are. And so as we understand that, it makes our journey easier because we're not struggling with ourselves. We're not as overwhelmed because stress isn't overwhelming us and having us get way off balance because we don't know how to deal with it. It makes us be able to stay more balanced as caregivers. It also, and this is huge, it gives us permission to focus on what we're good at and ask for help in the areas we're not. And instead of judging ourselves and saying, oh, I'm no good, I'm a failure, it's like, no, I know myself. The best thing I can do so that I can be the best version of myself possible is focus on these things and get support in these areas.
That is tremendous, right? I mean, I have known caregivers over the last 20 years that have said those exact words, right? And other caregivers, of course, you know, someone says every caregiver's journey is different because every person that's been ever diagnosed with some form of dementia is different. And even if you have different people diagnosed with the same thing, they all have Alzheimer's disease, they're all going to be different because the people are different and the disease exhibits itself differently and the personalities and everything is different. So when you get advice from someone who knows someone who knows someone, that doesn't apply really to you or your situation. And I just had a caregiver tell me I facilitate a caregiver support group every month. And one of the gals that comes, she said, you know, I don't want to hear about a neighbor's husband's sister's mother, right? That doesn't mean anything to me. She said, I take care of my husband. I only want to talk to other women who take care of their husbands because I can relate to them. Nobody knows what it's like. You know, it's different taking care of a grandmother that has dementia. It's different taking care, you know, of a friend or whatever. But, you know, she was right on point with what you're saying as far as I only want to hear about what's relevant to me because I can identify with this, taking in my own situation, my husband's personality, my personality, and then see what I can take from it. And if it doesn't work for me, it's okay. I can leave it on the table. And you giving caregivers, you know, that permission to do that because caregivers think they have to be sometimes a martyr. Sometimes they feel like, you know, they have to do everything and they're not doing enough if they don't, you know, try to kill themselves in the process. And I think caregivers really do need to hear that. And thank you so much for sharing that.
I just thought of one other piece that's also very helpful with that. And it is especially if you invite someone else into the home as someone who's hired or a volunteer, when you understand their personality as well, part of having the relationship be as good as possible when they're working together is being able to understand personality dynamics. And it's very simple. This is not something you need to go to school for. There's some very simple pieces of it. And yet it makes it easier for people to have a more positive relationship together.
Absolutely. I love that. It's a lot of it has to do with mirroring too, you know, and mirroring the person that you're dealing with. And if you all don't know what that is, and I'm sure you talk about that, but we can talk about that when we come back for just a moment. We're going to go to a commercial break and we're going to be giving away a free book. So get a pen and a paper handy because you won't want to miss this opportunity for a free caregiving book. We'll be right back. Thanks.
Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Communities. Arden Courts has over 50 assisted living communities throughout the United States, and they are only focused on memory care because that's all they do. Arden Courts is a great resource for you, whether you're looking for support groups or seminars to learn more. And today, just because you've tuned into this program, they'd like to give you this free book. It's called The 36-Hour Day. It was written by Dr. Peter Rabins and Nancy Mace, and it's actually in its 5th edition. It's so popular. It's been around a long time, but because it's continually updated, it's fresh, it's new. And if you're a caregiver and you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. Today you can have it just for the asking, and the way you do that is send an email. The email address is delray, D-E-L-R-A-Y, at arden-courts.com. Delray at arden, A-R-D-E-N, courts, C-O-U-R-T-S.com. Tell them in your email that you saw this free offer for the 36-Hour Day book on the Caregiver Solutions Info Show. Give us your name, your address, and your telephone number, and they'll be happy to mail the book directly to you. Again, if you don't know this book, you haven't read it, get it today because it will really help you. So today my special guest is Sue Ryan. Sue also wrote a book, and it's about her journey with her husband Jack, who was diagnosed 10 years ago with Alzheimer's disease, and all that she's learned along the way being a caregiver over 40 years and helping companies and professionals as well as family caregivers. Which, hi Sue, welcome back. I just talked about caregiving and professionals, which leads me to ask you, some people may not know the distinction between a professional caregiver and a non-professional caregiver. Would you like to explain what that is?
Sure. While there are a variety of different definitions, I will give you what my definition is. And I'm not saying this is the only definition, but it's my understanding, and the way that I use it is a professional caregiver is licensed. They are certified, they've got education on how to do caregiving, and it's their profession. In my book, I give them all kinds of respect, and I use a capital C for them. I am a non-professional caregiver. I am an unpaid caregiver. I am a family caregiver. Those are 3 different words that are being used. I am someone who, this is not my profession. It's not my career. I am not certified. There are some of us who have gotten certified as dementia caregivers, and yet we would not be able to be hired by a company because of that to give caregiving support.
And it's important for people to know because, you know, we're thrown in really unexpectedly into the role of being a caregiver, although there are other caregivers you can pay to come in and help. But today we're talking about the family caregiver, the unpaid caregiver, and your support for them through the books and through your online courses. And you are coming up with a new online course to help caregivers. Tell us about that.
Because I had so many questions that people would ask me about different parts of my journey, and because I've been on the entire journey so many times, I recognized that I was unable to find any kind of a resource that walked people through the entire journey. And I created the caregiver's journey, and it has 5 phases. The first phase is called the caregiver's primer. It's for before the journey begins, when you can kind of see your loved one or your family member getting a little bit disoriented, some changes, and you start having conversations. So it's before the journey begins, or you're sitting next to your loved one, holding hands in the doctor's office, and you all of a sudden get a diagnosis, and you're a caregiver and they're a care receiver. So the first phase is tips and tricks and things for strategies of in the beginning, the caregiver's primer. And the second one is the journey begins with me, which helps walk through understanding yourself in a meaningful way, giving yourself permission to be you. And then the third one goes into the details of that 5 steps of the day in and day out, that messy middle when we're doing the caregiving, whether it's as a primary caregiver or any of the other roles of caregiving support. The 4th phase is one that actually carries through our entire journey, and I call it the grace of grief. Grief is an emotion that we're meant to have, or we wouldn't have that emotion. Just like joy or anger or any other emotion, we're meant to have the emotion of grief. We're meant to learn from it. It's meant to make us a better person. And yet in the process, if we don't understand it because we haven't had practice with it, we don't really know what to do. I'm not a professional and I'm not a grief counselor. I introduce people into the concept of what grief is. And one of the things is to help them have their own version of grief for themselves, and then also to be able to process it. So the 5th phase is moving forward. That while your grieving journey is going to be different, and you are grieving things from the very beginning. My husband and I used to travel. It was challenging for him to travel. So do you grieve the loss of traveling? Yes. Did I consciously choose we wouldn't do that? Yes. And so it's processing the correct emotion. And if you don't process the correct emotion, you can't get through it. So moving forward is that once you have processed grief correctly, which doesn't mean you're completely done with it, but you start reinventing, reawakening, rediscovering who you are now, that your formal caregiving journey has ended. Like I said, I was 6 years overlapped between my dad and my husband in a dual caregiving journey. So I consciously chose to step away from a number of things. When I've processed the grief after my husband passes away and I'm ready to move forward, I want to have a process for how to do that. And I created that through the journey with my dad, because he had been my hero and I had learned so many things. So I've practiced it with other family and loved ones, and I'm introducing how to rediscover it, because we're meant to thrive in our lives. And so when we're finished with our formal journey, is how do we get back to recognizing who we are now and who we can become, and giving ourselves permission to be that person.
I think that is so important. I love that part of the journey discussion, because so many caregivers who have lost their spouse to dementia, they're lost now themselves. They've lost their purpose. They've lost their life because it was so tied in with the caregiving and with their identification as a caregiver. And they are at a loss. And what now, right? And I think that is a wonderful next step that you're addressing for those caregivers. You actually say on your website that your role as a caregiver has helped you in other roles of your life. How so?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yes, first of all, having brought together massive acceptance and radical presence has made every other area of my life easier, because I'm not worried about things I can't control. And of course, all we can control is ourselves. I accept exactly where I am without judgment. When I have something I'm struggling with, I explore my beliefs to make sure that my beliefs are current and up to date. And those are the kinds of things that can help me. And it also helps me to recognize I'm not meant to be great at everything. It's okay. I can get help. And the other thing that has been a huge impact for me that I've learned from my caregiving journey, if we're not processing the correct emotion, we can't work through our emotions and we can't move forward. For example, in our caregiving journey, we often have anger and frustration, guilt, worry, sorry. We have a variety of different things all jumbled together. And when we do, we can't get clear on any of those emotions. We can't process them. So we go through our entire caregiving journey being worried, feeling guilty, apologizing for things we don't need to apologize for, struggling, and not being able to have the purity of that emotion. Having learned all of that, And now, whether it's in other experiences with my family, if it's in my professional career, if anything else I'm doing, I now make sure that I'm having the correct emotion for the experience, process it, know that I can only control myself. I don't have to be great at everything. And it just makes life easier.
Wow. So I imagine that that's why you have said that the caregiving journey and the tips that you share in the caregiving journey that are so beneficial and so relevant to caregivers can also help people that are not currently a caregiver. And that's what you mean by that, right? Helping them process emotions, helping them to get through the day-to-day life and struggles. And you don't have to be a caregiver to benefit from that part of life and your journey. And I think that all ties together. I love that.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. So, if people are listening and watching today and they're interested in learning more, I'd like for you to share how they can purchase your books. And also, if they're interested in taking the online course, maybe you'd like to give your website address where they can go on and learn how to register for that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm going to launch the course on September 27th, and that date just happened to have come to me, and it's my husband's birthday.
Oh, nice celebration.
I'm launching it then. Nice celebration. I'm going to put the link out on my website. My website is SueRyan.solutions, SOLUTIONS, and I'm going to put it on the media page. And there will be a link to be able to register if you're interested in it. And when I launch it, you'll be able to sign up for it. One of the things that I choose to do because of my journey and because I want to make it easy for everyone is while I'm delivering a number of sessions, I'm making each one very short, 5 to 7 minutes at the very most, so that as busy caregivers, people can step into whatever's relevant for them at the time. And I've also made the price very, very low because I don't want anybody not to be able to get this kind of support on their journey. And I'm doing this because I want everyone to be able to have an easier journey than I did. There'll be challenges, and yet the better prepared we are and the more things we can be prepared for, the easier it is for us to focus and not be overwhelmed, but stay more positive and balanced.
Absolutely. And how about your books? Can they get that off your website and purchase your books that way too?
They will get a link on the website on the media page, which will take them to Amazon. And they could also go to Amazon directly. And it's 5 steps to navigate your care. It's our journey of love, 5 steps to navigate your caregiving journey.
And you have a couple other books on there, right? That they can look at.
I do.
Yeah, I saw that.
I do. Yes,
that.
I've been part of several other books. Because when I'm always being a caregiver, just like I'm always being other roles in my life. When I'm not working in my role as a caregiver, I'm a speaker, coach, educator, and author for people becoming the greatest leaders of themselves and others.
And you are doing an excellent job of it. And I want to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your expertise and your story, your life story, and being so positive and giving inspiration to other caregivers. I really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you inviting me on. And if anyone has any other questions, they could email me if they wanted to as well at SueRyan.solutions, and I'd be glad to help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in today, too, to this great show and watching Sue Ryan and hearing about her journey and her help that she can give other caregivers on their journey. And so if you would like to learn more, you can go to her website. And again, her website is sueryan.solutions. We're going to be back next week, same time, same place, every Tuesday, 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, with another show on caregiversolutions.info. So be with us then. Until then, have a great evening, have a great week, and take care of yourself, caregivers. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.